Last time on Akatar, the Fey armies of the Night Court are on a campaign of conquest over the country of Prithian, and the human kingdoms of the south are next. A young woman, Feyre, is out hunting when she encounters a beastly warrior who saves her life. She confides in him and learns his name is Tamlin of the Spring Court. Unfortunately, the agents of the Night Court are looking for Tamlin and find their way to Feyre's village. After a confrontation, Tamlin uses his abilities to take Feyre and her sisters to safety. And now, back to our story. The group lands somewhere in the middle of a forest. Tamlin is unconscious in a little crater. The sisters are relatively unharmed, save for Elaine being absolutely in shock. Nesta, upon waking up, puts two and two together and realizes that Feyre knew about Tamlin the whole time, and immediately starts laying into her sister. They start yelling at each other, with Nesta saying this is all Feyre's fault. Meanwhile, Feyre wasn't intending any of this and insists they all would have died if she hadn't made that choice to trust Tamlin. Meanwhile, Elaine is cowering in the corner, covering her ears. Then Tamlin wakes up without a single motion of the older sisters, kneels to Elaine's level, and tells her, "Look at me, child." And he lays a large hand on Elaine's shoulder. Together, they breathe deeply, with Tamlin sitting with Elaine until she calms down. "What is this, Fey sorcery?" Nesta huffs. "Deep breathing. You should try it," Tamlin replies. Tamlin wanders over to a tree and lies down. He says that he needs rest due to using his powers to escape. They rest for the night around Tamlin. Nesta is still furious at the whole endeavor, insisting that it is still Feyre's fault. Feyre tries to tell her sister again that there's no point in fighting about it since they don't have much choice in the matter. They all go to sleep for the night. The next morning, Feyre goes out to hunt for food and comes back with a deer. While they eat, Tamlin explains that now that he has saved them, they are now in more danger than ever from the Night Court. Their only hope, he says, is that they find the Combar Durian, the name for the resistance movement, so the sisters will be safe. Once the sisters are accounted for, Tamlin will find the Weaver to break his curse. "What will become of us?" Elaine asked. "You will be taken care of," Tamlin assures her. "In the meantime, I will ensure no harm comes to any of you." Nesta prickles at this, still angry about their whole situation. In response, Tamlin drives his sword into the ground and bows in the manner of a classical knight. He swears loyalty to the sisters and swears on his honor that he will protect them. "I, Tamlin R. Eoster, Knight-errant of Eoster, Court of Spring, solemnly give my life to protect the sisters." The sisters exchange glances, standing in silence for a moment. Then Elaine, in a sign that surprises both her sisters, goes to Tamlin and places her hand on his paw, saying, "I accept." Nesta and Feyre exchange glances, then follow suit. Thus, their party is formed. Meanwhile, Bedek, the sisters' home village, has been burned to the ground, and the Illyrians are busy taking slaves and picking over the remains. Amarantha gets a message from the Night King about how much she's screwing up not finding Tamlin. Amarantha is quite upset by this and decides to do something drastic. She's going to send the knight out on his own. She snaps her fingers and guards bring her cages containing Attors, horrible misshapen gargoyle-like creatures native to the Night Court's lands of the north. After discovering a lock of Feyre's hair, Amarantha uses that to give the Attors something to follow and tells the creatures to keep an eye on the knight, just in case he starts to think for himself. With that, she sends her forces out to look for them. Our heroes set out for a nearby town to meet with Tamlin's rebel allies. They come upon a ruined caravan being picked over by 3 human bandits. Tamlin attempts to fight, but he is still drained from his earlier actions. The bandits close in, but Nesta goes, "F*** it," and grabs an axe and buries it into one of the bandits' chests. Feyre looses some arrows and kills the other one. The surviving bandit hesitates, then runs away in terror. Feyre lowers her bow, and Nesta finds a holder for her new axe, feeling it suits her. Meanwhile, Elaine finds an antique staff marked with symbols from a time before the fissure. Tamlin notes he cannot read them, for it is an older language that he is unfamiliar with. Elaine feels drawn to it. She doesn't feel comfortable holding a weapon, but she feels like the staff is for her. They continue journeying for a few more days, staying off roads and hunting in the woods until they find themselves at the village, Whitecliff. But big shock, there are Night Court soldiers there that are questioning people. The sisters leave Tamlin in the woods and go into a local tavern with the aim of locating one man in particular, the Shadow Singer. They head into the tavern and try asking around, except there's already word out for an arrest as they are aiding the fugitive Tamlin. A bunch of thugs rise and are about to set themselves on the sisters when the Shadow Singer appears to protect them. He is impossibly fast, able to use shadows to jump around short distances akin to Nightcrawler from X-Men to fight off 20 men with impossible ease. While the fight is going on, another fighter enters the fray, a dashing Han Solo-type figure who introduces himself as Cassian. The duo protects the sisters from the crowd, but the commotion in the tavern unfortunately has drawn attention. Now the sisters are stuck in another bad spot, but Cassian and the Shadow Singer manage to get the girls an opening and they all escape back to Tamlin. Shadow Singer introduces himself. His name is Azriel, a spy from the Night Court. Cassian also introduces himself. He is a former Illyrian guard who switched sides when he realized who he was really fighting for. Nesta instantly doesn't like them, especially Cassian. She already thinks of him as a brute and a monster. Couldn't be farther from the truth, miss, Cassian said with a grin. Sure it isn't, Nesta sneered. Do you still have it? Azriel asked. Yes, Tamlin replied. He searches through his ragged clothes and produces a small gold object. It's a tiny gold charm with a rose engraved into it. Feyre asks what it is. You haven't told them? Azriel asked Tamlin. Tamlin's features darkened. I hope to get them to safety first. Tell us what? Feyre asked. Tamlin then tells them that this is a piece of the crown of Danu, a sacred artifact to the High Fae. The crown, he explains, is a key to use the cauldron. Wait, Elaine interjects. I know this legend. The Cauldron of Danu, the place from which all life flows. It's real? Tamlin nodded. I thought only the High Fae would know those things. Who told you that? There were tiny green men who would visit me in the garden back home. They asked for vegetables, and in exchange they told me stories. They kept me company when my sisters were gone. Tamlin laughed to himself. Loricons are hard to please. Seems they took a liking to you. Feyre and Nesta are surprised by this and ask why Elaine didn't tell them. You didn't ask. Elaine answers. Elaine then tells the story. When the world was young, all living things flowed from the Cauldron of Danu. It is unclear what exactly it is, but it holds the power of shaping life itself and could even grant immortality. But this power was too great in the wrong hands, so the goddess Danu, Lady of Life, took the means of which to control it, her golden crown, and split it into 7 pieces, one for each court and one for mankind. Thus, no one person could ever have the power. In addition, the cauldron was hidden away, and those who knew of its location, ancient beings known as the Old Creatures, scattered to the wind. The Fae courts, in turn, held on to the crown pieces as sacred heirlooms in the hopes that no one would ever claim them all. Then Azriel cuts in. But the Fae courts could not stop fighting amongst themselves for land and for other petty reasons. It was for these petty reasons that led to the building of the fissure not 1,000 years ago. Now the Night King has decided that to end any more conflict between the Fae, he will find the cauldron and use its power to make himself and his armies unstoppable. Then he will have peace in Prythian. The Night King has 5 out of 7 pieces of that crown now, and the rebels' only option to stave off the Night Court's advances is to keep the crown incomplete and to find the cauldron and destroy it for good, if such a thing is possible. The plan was to meet up with Azriel and Cassian and get the sisters to safety. Azriel mentions that there is a stronghold just a few days' journey from here, in a place called Highwealth Forest. You weren't followed, were you? Azriel asked the party. No, Feyre insisted. At least I don't think so. Azriel stared into the night sky. You can never be too certain these days. The group begin making their way to Highwealth, and we get some moments to build the characters. Here we can flesh out Azriel and Cassian. Azriel's the more level-headed and cooler of the two, and Cassian is the dashing and charming Han Solo type. Real bromance vibes between them. We don't go into a ton of detail on how they met, but suffice to say they've been through a lot together, and we can infer that through their actions. Tamlin serves as a mentor father figure to the group, showing that despite his frightening appearance and debilitating curse, he's kind and caring to everyone. The sisters can have a few scenes to show them affirming their bond despite their situation. Maybe Nesta starts to soften to Feyre and even acknowledges her misplaced emotions. I've been thinking about things, Nesta said, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry. This is new, Feyre thought. About what? I was mad at you for a lot of things, but now I understand how small it all seems, and considering everything, I'd rather be alive than angry. Here we can learn more about Tamlin's relationship with the knight and why he was imprisoned. Tamlin then goes on to explain that when he was a young soldier, he found himself on a battlefield with a great warrior named Rhysand, the prince of the Night Court. Through their ordeals, they grew close, like brothers. But then, one day, Tamlin says, Rhysand brought troubling news of the Night King's desires to begin a campaign of conquest. After that, he never saw Rhysand again. Then Tamlin learned of a warrior clad in black capable of terrible slaughter. Tamlin met this knight in battle and immediately recognized his old friend's techniques. That's right, my version of Rhysand is the Knight of Thorns. We can also explain that the Spring Court was always supposed to act as a border of sorts to protect the southern human kingdoms and had done so for centuries. But when the Night Court's forces came knocking, Tamlin offered his life in exchange for not harming his people. For his troubles, he was imprisoned and tortured by Amarantha. I'm a broken warrior of a fallen land, Tamlin said solemnly. All I have left is to remove this curse. But even then, what do I have to go back to? Feyre didn't know how to answer that. She knew too well the fragility of hope. I don't know, was all she could manage. Cut to, the Knight of Thorns has arrived at the town the group is recently at. The people are especially afraid because the knight is here. The main Attors monster, named Elias, demands to know where the party is. When no one answers, Elias tells the knight to kill all of them. But the knight hesitates, like a dog pulling on a leash. Elias then uses a charm given to him by Amarantha to force the knight to act, and thus the warrior cuts down hapless bystanders. Finally, someone tells them where they are going, and the villains leave. Back to the main party. While the gang is resting near an abandoned fort just before Highwealth, Elaine wanders off to be alone for a bit. She's finding a sort of kinship with the land and all the little creatures there. She can feel the magic in the air, in the ground and the soil. It can manifest as hearing voices on the wind. Her staff serves as a grounding mechanism that makes all the voices in her head tolerable. She hears a radiant song within everything. She feels, for the first time in a while, genuine peace. Then, amidst the silence, she hears something. Something terrible is coming. She begins to panic and dashes back to the others. Azriel looks up and sees the Attors flying overhead. So begins an action-packed scene where they run through the woods while the party tries to escape the Attors. The creatures are these vile things that in between doing their mission just enjoy screwing with them. Think like gremlins, but they have wings. They can have cool moments like one of them picks up Nesta and starts carrying her away, then Cassian asks Tamlin to boost him up with wind, and Cassian rescues Nesta in a small mid-air battle. Feyre can shoot a few down with her arrows. The only one who can't really fight is Elaine, so they double down to protect her. Then, when they've fought off the swarm, the knight appears. Tamlin steals himself, then gives the crown piece to Feyre and tells her to run away. She doesn't want to leave him, but he commands her to go regardless. Tamlin and the knight proceed to fight again, but this time Tamlin is visibly more exhausted than before. He's fighting a losing battle against the knight, and Feyre knows that he's holding back. Tamlin doesn't want to hurt his old friend. Meanwhile, Elias is taunting Tamlin and the party, using a magical item that resembles barbed wire like a cat's cradle to manipulate the knight like a puppet. "Knight without a land, brought to suffer for no reason at all," the creature chortles. Feyre turns around and in the middle of the battle loses an arrow at Elias, sticking the creature in the shoulder and knocking him to the ground. Right as the arrow hits its target, the knight swipes at Feyre and sends her flying. His controller briefly immobilized, the knight comes to his senses. "Tamlin?" Rhysand's voice spoke from the prison of armor. "Forgive me, brother," Tamlin whispered. He then makes one mighty blow and knocks the knight into the trees, briefly incapacitating his enemy. Meanwhile, Feyre is expiring in the grass. She sees the faint outline of people in her vision before losing consciousness. When Feyre comes to, she's lying in a bed surrounded by her family. Elaine is overjoyed to see her big sister alive and safe, as are Cassian, Azriel, and Tamlin. Nesta even reluctantly shows affection. The group have found the rebel outpost in a keep. They meet with a general, Lucien, an Autumn Court Fae and veteran of the many wars fought by the Fae courts, who calls a meeting for the group and the soldiers. They plan to regroup with the larger army in a secure location. Lucien explains that the rebels are working to try to get the last piece of the crown from the human kingdoms. Since the rebels have the Spring Court's crown piece, they have an advantage over the Night King, but the Night King's forces are tightening their hold upon the other courts, and there is word that they are thinking of destroying the fissure to make way for an invasion force. The best strategic move, then, is to find one of the old creatures who would know the location of the Cauldron and keep them from falling into the Night Court's hands. There is only one person who could possibly know where these ancient beings could be, a witch known as the Weaver, who lives in a blighted place known as the Whispering Swamp. Meanwhile, the party are integrating and learning about this union between humans and Fae working together against a common enemy. Here we can flesh out the qualities of the different courts and Wild Fae. We can show how in these unbelievable circumstances it's possible for coexistence to happen. The sisters are all in awe, surprised that the world could be so big. In the interim, Tamlin meets up with Feyre. They start talking and she asks him why he was so insistent on protecting them considering his condition. He talks about how before the Night Court, the Spring Court's duty was to protect the land around the fissure. He feels it is his duty to protect humanity as much as his own people, but he feels he is a failure considering he couldn't protect his own land, and if any harm came to the sisters or his comrades, then he would be ruined. "You have done your duty well, then, Sir Knight," Feyre assures him, laying a hand in his massive paw. "You are the most noble being I have ever met." Soon, everyone reconvenes and they discuss their next plans. The plan is that there will be an expedition force dispatched to find the Weaver and acquire the location of one of the old creatures. Then the base will pack up and leave, so time is of the essence. One of the leaders of the mission is Amren, a druidess among them and former apprentice of the Weaver, who explains that the Weaver will not talk to just anyone. Tamlin immediately insists that he wants to join the expedition. Upon that, Feyre decides she wants to join too. After that, Nesta and Elaine decide to join. Cassian and Azriel follow suit, so along with a few other soldiers, they set out onto one last adventure of the story. Side note, this version of Amren, like the rest of this book, is entirely different from the source I'm taking from. Amren in this is an older human woman instead of a Judeo-Christian angel or something. She's a magic user and is very mortal. That's it. She serves as a sort of matriarchal figure, as well as acting as a more direct mentor for Elaine. Amren uses spells as well as a bag of charms that can do various actions, as well as hold her own with a weapon. Hopefully that's something I've been trying to get across in this rewrite. Our characters are not ultra powerful and OP. The characters are skilled and capable, yes, but they are still normal. That creates stakes, which creates, what's the word? Tension! And tension is one of the things that stories live and die on. No tension equals no reason to be invested. Meanwhile, deep in the woods, something stirs within the mind of the Knight of Thorns. For a moment, there is no stinging pain compelling him to do terrible things against his will. Some of his armor has been knocked off, including that on his hand. He feels his own flesh. A name resurfaces in his mind. Rhysand. The moment of clarity is ripped away as Elias, having recovered from his arrow wound, reasserts control. Meanwhile, Amarantha calls Elias via magical means and demands an update. Elias feeds her a little white lie and tells her they are simply behind schedule. Amarantha tells him that if he doesn't get that crown piece, then she will personally kill the Attors slowly. The creature is more determined than ever to hunt down the party, especially the human that wounded him. With the surviving Attors, Elias directs the knight and his forces back onto the trail of the group.